Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome to our community of practice call on lead links, the lead link function in Holacracy. So I'll be hosting us for the day. This is Brian, and I've got Alexia here, or Lex for short, who's one of the other partners of HolacracyOne, and one of us that fills a couple of lead link roles in addition to myself, and we'll dive in and share some thoughts and see what happens. And so, Lex, welcome. You ready to go?
Absolutely.
And as we go, feel free to share thoughts in the chat, as always, or questions, and we'll integrate them as best we can. So the motivation for this call came partly from a post, a thread in the forums that was discussing and asking some questions around the nature of the lead link, and triggered a whole lot of thoughts for me, but more than I had time to type, or energy anyway, to type into a forum thread. So it seemed like it might be a useful topic to dig into, because I know those are the kind of questions that come up sometimes as we implement Holacracy as well, and people are getting used to what is this new lead link role? How is it similar or different from a conventional manager? And I think it's a particularly challenging one because as much as in the early days it's differentiated from the conventional manager, there's also a lot of the value that a conventional manager role fills that the lead link needs to get in a different way. So then there's kind of a reintegration and coming back to what is it that the lead link does and how to think about that role and how to hold that role. So I thought we could dive in and chat. And Lex, you and I haven't talked all that much about this in the past, so we might actually see some new thoughts or insights emerging as we go, which would be great. And let's find out. So I guess one of the maybe framing questions here is in the beginning, when an organization is first adopting Holacracy or getting used to Holacracy, what isn't a lead link? What's one of the first steps of differentiation? Let's start by talking about what is it not, knowing we might circle back and reintegrate some of that in a different way. But what is a lead link not? And Lex, let me just open the question. Maybe you can share something. So when you're filling a lead link role, if you were newer to this Holacracy thing, what aren't you doing as a lead link? How is it different from, I know you've filled conventional management roles in the past. How is this different?
A little bit less babysitting. I think what I think you're asking is it's management. You're not a manager. You're not really the boss. You're just kind of holding, it sounds really light and airy, but there's more to it than that. You're really just holding the space. You're responsible for the entire role, and it's just like any other role that you're just kind of filling the whole thing, and you might have other people that fill roles within the subcircle, but ultimately you're responsible for the role. I'm not sure, is that what you were asking? What you're looking for?
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. So I feel the same way. It's in a conventional management role, it is more. It feels more like babysitting. It shouldn't feel like that in the lead link role, and when it does, it might indicate there's something else at play that needs to be dealt with. It's less. You're not taking care of people in the same way that you would as a manager or conventional manager. You're really in a caretaking. You're the superhero for the team as a conventional manager. Your job is to make sure nobody else has any tensions that are in their way, to process and take care of all those tensions. Your job is to make sure they're all reasonably comfortable and happy and cared for. Those are not your jobs as a lead link in Holacracy. And at the same time, in a conventional manager, you're used to kind of calling the shots for pretty much anything that you want to call a shot around. So everyone else is there to kind of support or assist you, but you can at any time jump in anywhere, and when your heroic leadership is needed, lead and make a judgment call on anything. And that part is different, and that's one of the first journeys we see those new to managers coming into Holacracy taking, right? It's this differentiating from being the superhero leader that we've seen before, and differentiating from being the caretaker leader, the prevent tensions from anyone in the team, or at least address them and get them out of the way. all of that is shifting dramatically. And that's I think part of what's left behind.
Yeah, there's that interesting interplay of filling a role and having complete authority within that role, but also having other roles within the circle that are also completely, the role fillers completely have authority in those roles. So, I mean, I have a superpower of approving budget, or maybe resourcing and prioritizing, but I'm not responsible for if somebody's having interpersonal issues with another person, or as long as it's not affecting the role, getting the role done, people take care of themselves and the roles take care of themselves.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in lots of other calls in the past, the shift to when you have an environment where everybody can process tensions themselves, you don't need to take care of people and process tensions for them in the same way.
I'm not a mediator, and I'm not a facilitator ever in any of the meetings.
Yeah, you can trust the process to sort out the tensions that need to get processed for the organization. And you don't have to, as a conventional leader, you're a gatekeeper, right? You're the one that decides what tensions get processed. And in Holacracy, it's not that every tension gets processed, it's every tension gets processed to the extent it's useful to process for the purpose. And the process sorts that out, not you. So there's a kind of a letting go, instead of you being the gatekeeper of what gets integrated, what gets attention, what gets processed. Instead, it's the process as the gatekeeper. If they can process the tension, then it must be a useful one to process. And if they can't process the tension, it's either they don't know how yet, and it's not your job to take care of them and show them how, although if asked, you can provide some help, or it's because it's not a tension that is actually grounded in the organization and doesn't need to get processed. So there's kind of a letting go of the gatekeeper role and just saying, hey, on you, sucks if you can't process your tension. But let me help you figure out how if you'd like to ask. If you'd like to engage me, one of my accountabilities that you can expect is for me to offer some coaching around how to fill your roles, including how to process tensions of your roles. So that's still there, but that's a big shift.
I think that in a lot of conventional companies, also this manager role is spends a lot of time protecting the people that work for them from the people that they work for, or vice versa, or both, right? And that's not you want things that get into the role, to the circle, that need to get in for the role, but you want all that stuff to flow right through, because it's not your responsibility to take care of that. So I think that's where a lot of the politics slip away, is because now nobody can suck up to you to get their needs met or whatever, even in service of a role, because you don't really have that authority. They already have that authority. So I think there's a protective, I think Bernard Marie in the COP brought up the membrane. There is a membrane, but it's about the role, and it's not about protecting people from the top or from the bottom and in between. It's about protecting the role in a sense, but maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good time for that, I think. Let's move to, so we've talked a lot about what a lead link isn't in a lot of other calls as well, and just frame the distributed authority shift and all that. But I think one of the interesting things, it sounds like then that a lead link isn't a significant role in this system, and I'd actually say the opposite. It's one of the most significant roles still in Holacracy. It's just different, it's reframed. And lots of other roles get to be significant too. But lead link does have a really fundamental function in holding this whole system together. Let's talk about that a little bit. And I love the cellular metaphor that you were pointing out there. It's as lead link, you are the membrane of that circle. So one of the functions of the lead link is to act as the whole circle within its broader environment. Right? They are that circle. It's as if they are filling a single role, which is the entire circle. So they're showing up in the broader company, and they're representing that entire circle. And part of that membrane is being a good boundary, right? So as lead link, I feel tension when I see something poking a hole in the boundary of the circle. So, I had a case a little while ago where somebody in our external world was reaching directly into a circle that I fill lead link on and interacting with one of the roles within that wasn't intended to be an external interface. And that's a lead link tension. There's a hole being poked through the boundary of the circle, right? I'm holding the boundary. I want that distraction to go away. I want that waste to go away. So I'll step in as lead link, wham, and represent the whole circle. And actually, I'm always doing that. Even when it's an intentional connection in, it's my job to figure out, here's a message coming in from outside the circle. Where does it land? Where is the channel through the membrane? What role should handle this tension, this message coming in? So I expose an interface into the circle. This role is the interface to reach into for this kind of message. And I'm always aware of that and always looking for messages poking through that kind of don't belong coming in. So I think that's one of the major functions. And holding that boundary. And Lex, I saw you do this with our content and outreach circle as well, where there was kind of a protective quality of the circle itself. Not the people within it, but the circle itself. And it was only visible from outside the circle, in the sense of when somebody was interacting with the circle and trying to kind of shove something into it that didn't belong, there was an energy there. Or I saw it within the circle's meetings when somebody would unintentionally show up not representing a CNO role and try to bring that into a circle meeting. And I feel the same in my circles. It's one of the things that just instantly raises a red flag for me as lead link. When somebody in a circle meeting is showing up not embodying a role, they're showing up either embodying a role in a different circle and trying to affect change in my circle, or they're showing up personally and trying to affect change in my circle, not based on one of the roles they fill.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important about that, and this is, I mean, any role you fill, is that by holding the boundaries, it's really, to me, it's about protecting the integrity of the role as stated in governance. And by protecting the boundaries, you kind of can see them better. That's what I think really is helpful. So if I take on something in a circle that we don't have authority to do, then it makes it just fuzzier for everybody else. And that it's not just about being inside the membrane or outside of the membrane, it's for everybody. And when you have fuzziness in a role, it can make it harder for other roles to understand how to interact with it or see their own boundaries. So a lot of it to me is just a discipline in just holding the boundaries, and I guess it's sort of like that you have an invisible wall, and that's how you know where it is as you keep pushing on it, and it has to push back. And I think that's the important job of the role filler, especially of lead link, where you have other roles and other people filling roles that are within the membrane of when something pushes, allowing them to feel that pushback so they know where the edges are.
That's an interesting way to point it out. So one of the functions there is to help people understand the circle boundaries by holding to them so they can feel it when they hit up against it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Without the lead link doing that, the circle loses its boundary, and it feels like it's just a bunch of roles within the broader circle, but strangely separated into a separate meeting.
It can be hard. Sometimes some roles especially when they first start out, or especially with content and outreach, had a lot of trouble just because there was a lot of things that the organization needed from the organ, but it wasn't set up like that in governance. So, I mean, there's some things that you have to change, but fuzziness, I mean, some roles are just fuzzier than others, but it's just really about holding that membrane the best you can, I think.
Yeah, and I'll see it sometimes within my circles, an interesting difference between when somebody's showing up bringing in information that they might have from another role or personally, no problem at all. There's no sense of that's a problem, right? It's useful. It's information. It doesn't really matter how you got it. If it's useful information, bring it into the circle. So at first, when people are first sensing that I'm holding something as lead link and they're not quite sure what, but every now and then they get some pushback on something or whatever, one of the first tendencies is to be cautious about where they bring information from. And you'll hear people say, well, my other role told me, or something like that. And it's funny because it doesn't matter. It's all that matters is you have information. It doesn't matter what role you got it from or where you have it personally. If you have information that's relevant, bring it. What matters is if you're trying to affect change, what purpose are you serving in affecting that change? Right? Are you serving a purpose of one of your roles in this circle or not? And if the answer is not, you're trying to affect change in service of something outside the circle, even well-intended. I'm trying to help the whole company, right? sounds great, it can be very harmful. And as lead link, one of my jobs is to hold to that boundary and make sure anybody trying to affect change is doing so in service of a role they fill in that circle. And if not, to question what role is that coming from.
Yeah, it's really about, I think it's really about whether or not it's within the membrane or outside the membrane or going through a channel that's allowed, right?
Yeah.
That's any biological membrane. It has ways to get things in, and some things can get in and some things can't, but it's just a matter of not punching a hole, I think is what you had called it. You know, there's a difference between sticking food directly in my stomach and taking the pathway that my body was intended. Right? Or permission, maybe through IV, I've given permission for that to come into my body that way, but it's just really about where are you in the system at that point, and what role are you filling, and is it within the boundary or going through a proper channel?
Yes, absolutely. So holding to that membrane, and that's one of the other pieces. So that was kind of the external view. From you're holding to the membrane. So from the outside, there's a feeling of a solid membrane. From inside, if somebody's not acting from inside, they are treated as outside, not as inside. And when somebody is acting from inside, they can feel the membrane. Now there's another function, I think, if we zoom into the circle, when you're kind of within the functioning of a circle and you're the lead link. Now the role is often more invisible, I think, from within, because as long as we've got other roles using their distributed authority, getting stuff done, and if the governance is there to support all that, then the lead link role, that's when it really steps back, and it's not doing much. Yet I still think there's a few key functions there. One that occurs to me: you're always on guard for something slipping in a boundary, even from one of the role fillers within your circle if they're bringing in another role or personal. So there's a constant on guard. I feel like as lead link, at any point I have to be ready to step in if I'm sensing the circle's boundary threatened. And I think that's actually true for almost any role. Almost any role has to be ready to step in even when you're not energizing it. But with lead link, it's a little trickier because you've got this... it can happen. It's more subtle in some ways because you're really attuning to boundaries. And the other thing that comes up within the circle for lead link is I feel like I'm often I like how Bernard Marie says it. You fill the space, right? So if there is something falling between the other roles, you are the space between the roles, just like the cell. You know, it has its little cell parts. I'm at the limit of my biological knowledge. And nucleus, and there's a couple others. So you have your little cell parts, but you're the space in between, the fluid in between all of that. So if there's something that isn't being handled by another part in the cell, it's yours, and you have to be ready to jump in and hold it. At least until you can get to governance and get it clearly within another cell part, or create a new cell part to hold it, if that makes sense.
I think your role comes into play a lot when there's lack of clarity. So it's not in governance. And I see a lot of my work, lead link work, happens usually in governance or tactical meetings. I think that's when it comes up the most. Or sometimes when a message comes into the circle and nobody knows what to do with it, and then there's sort of a handoff there, and it usually means there needs to be a role or something that the circle, as long as it belongs in the circle, then the question is which role does it go to, and if that's not clear, then that's when the lead link comes into play.
Yeah, which is one of I love the beautiful irony perhaps here of compared to a conventional manager, this part is similar. Right? I mean, as a conventional manager, you're always the superhero, always acting as the whole circle, even when others are still doing the work. You're kind of always there. And in this, it's more subtle, but that part's the same. You are filling this entire role. You ultimately are accountable for the overall results, the overall functions of that circle. From the outside world, you don't get to blame anything on distributed authority. That wasn't my authority, it wasn't my fault, whatever. You don't get to do that. You are ultimately still responsible for the whole damn thing. And that doesn't deny that, okay, in this model distributed authority, that doesn't mean you have unlimited autocratic authority to step in and counteract whatever you like, right? So there's a beautiful interplay here. So as lead link, I'm still holding the whole, and I'm looking for anything falling between the cracks or anything fuzzy, not defined yet. And I'm ready to jump in as lead link at any point and act as the whole. But as long as there are other functions doing their thing in clear roles, through clear channels, defined through governance, then I'm invisible. I step back. So I'm not always heroically driving, but I'm ready to if anything's falling between the cracks at any point.
Yeah, from inside, you don't show up until somebody brushes against a boundary, I think, or there's lack of clarity.
Yes. And part of that, when there is lack of clarity, when things are fuzzy, part of your job, it's not to just fuse with it and lead it, which is what happens with conventional managers often. It's to define the new part of the cell, to differentiate. So one of the lead link's main jobs is a force for holding that boundary and then differentiating within it, right? And being really clear what's within the overall boundary of the circle and what's not. And then within it, differentiating the different parts driven by actual tensions. So not theoretically designing the different parts, although of course you bring a mental model in and you use one, but it's based on what you're sensing is getting in the way of this circle doing its work. What are the constraints to this circle doing its work? Now go find a useful way of thinking about it in order to define some new roles, some new accountabilities, some boundaries or connections. So when you have a very new circle, the lead link's job is much more one of differentiating, because at first it's going to be very fuzzy, very undifferentiated. And the lead link is trying to differentiate the circle. And that's a continuing process. Even when a mature circle exists, there will be new things needed of it. There will be always new discoveries of something that's not quite clear, or what we thought was clear starts changing, or we realize, wow, that really was actually somewhat unclear because we have more wisdom now. So there's a constant focus on differentiating the circle into its different roles. So you're kind of always looking at how to get those clean boundaries within the circle. To make sure something doesn't fall into the space, you need the entities within a circle to have clean boundaries. So I really feel like this, in a word, if I were going to sum up what the lead link's focus is, it would be boundaries. Boundary management, the boundary of the whole circle, and now the boundaries of all the different parts within, boundaries, and then the connections across boundaries.
I think sometimes that can be tricky. I guess depending on how the circle was formed, if you're talking about an existing implementation, not something that is brand new, and that's why you have a circle, it seems to me that probably the internal differentiation is a little bit trickier, because it's been my experience that I was lead linked of a circle, and before there was a circle, there was just this huge role that I was filling. So marketing and PR, for example, and it was just this huge undifferentiated role, which worked out for a while, but then after a while it just becomes too big, and now you've got these subsets of activities that you've been filling all of them, and you've been filling the whole role and the whole space in between. So sometimes I find it's a little bit more difficult to, maybe this is just me, to differentiate the things inside, which is why Holacracy is brilliant, because you have other people to help with that and role fillers to help with that and get that clarity, than to hold the external boundary.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I was just looking at some of the questions. Deborah pulled out from the forum thread just a bunch of different questions and kind of seeded me with them. So just looking at it, one of the questions is, so percentage-wise, what is the work of the lead link? What percentage of their time? We often say it's a very small role. And as I think about that in more nuance, my sense is it's a very small amount of time percentage-wise, but it's highly variable. So overall, I'd say I spend relatively little time in my lead link roles, but the standard deviation is very high. So on any given day, if something threatens a boundary, or if we run into a lack of clarity within the circle, suddenly my time in lead link skyrockets temporarily. And then my job is to get it back to zero. So it's almost like more, when I say very little time spent in lead link, that's your goal, that's your directionality. So whenever you're finding more time spent in lead link, it's because there's some lack of clarity within, or external disrespect of the boundary, or internal disrespect of the boundary or something. So your job is to figure out what that is and structure it away. If it's a lack of clarity on the scope of the circle, you clarify it. If it's lack of clarity within on what roles, how they're differentiated, and so you're filling something by default, you differentiate a new role. If it's somebody in a role that's blurring a boundary, you figure that out and you get that back to zero, or you get them out of the role and replace them with somebody else. If it's something in your broader environment that keeps dumping on your circle, you figure out how to hold that boundary and say no more clearly, or yes, whichever it is. But it's like, so whatever it is, you want to identify it and get it back to zero. And I think the more clear and clean the circle and all the role fillers are on their roles and holding to that boundary, the closer the lead link role goes to zero. So at least that's my experience. What's yours with how much time you spend?
Well, I don't know that I would say the goal is to zero. I almost would say the goal is to one, because there's sort of a maintenance thing that I think every lead link, well, every role filler wants to do, which is to keep an eye on the accountabilities of the role and make sure that they're current, and looking at, in the case of lead link, looking at all the roles in the circle and making sure that they are clear, and that, you know, that new stuff that's coming in, that basically just that everything makes sense, and that there's kind of a maintenance just on roles in general. For the most part, it's not a time-consuming role. The more stable the circle is, and some of that's just, I think, more how in tune the role is with the needs of reality, how stable that circle can be because of changing needs. I think some circles are just going to have more changes because they're much more affected by the changing needs of the organization or the super circle. So, and sometimes it takes a little while to get something right, just the structure. And by right, I mean requisite for now, not right forever. So I don't know that I would necessarily assume that a circle that's stable is the best case scenario or not best case scenario for any given circle. It would just depend on the changing environment.
That resonates with me too. It's always, you don't want zero. Zero is dead. If you get it to zero, then that would imply some, ideal point that you can never actually reach.
Right. Yeah. So approaching zero, I guess you could say. Yeah. But maintenance aside, I do feel like it really does depend on the role itself. Some roles are just much more dynamic. Usually more time in it means that there's less clarity either around the circle itself. That can take time. That can take a lot of time, because then you spend a lot of time holding a boundary there and trying to get that clarified in governance. And also internally, any changes to your external boundary or your external aim or purpose of the circle can change things internally, or lack of clarity internally can take more time, like you were saying, and you want to get that out of the way, because anytime you're filling in for a role as lead link, then you're kind of working around if you do it once, it's done once, but if you do it twice, then you're really working around a system. So that's kind of the way I feel about it. So some circles, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's another piece too. In addition to the boundaries and getting it towards zero by structuring, by addressing the tensions, by redesigning the internal flows of the circle. Sometimes the lead link needs to do that when there are things that can't get processed otherwise to smooth the flow. In addition to all that, there's another thing. The lead link is filling that whole role. So some of what they do is doing the work, right? Until they get there, until they figure out how to differentiate, right? So you've also, as a lead link, you've got to in some ways be prepared to fill any role that circle might create. You've got to have, so there is a high, it depends on the nature of the circle, but there is an expertise requirement. You've got to be prepared to, if you had nobody else and that circle were entirely yours to execute everything in, you've got to be prepared at least to some degree to do that. So the other thing you do is, especially in an early circle that's still differentiating, you do stuff. And you do stuff to figure out where the boundaries are. You don't guess at where the boundaries are. Do stuff and use that to figure out where the boundaries should be. And then you evolve those boundaries and see, well, now what do I have to do? So there's kind of a dynamic interplay between the structuring and the doing in order to generate data for how to structure. So there's also a doing component, and it's an entrepreneurial doing. You are building a business. You are building an organ, a structure, a cell, whatever.
Yeah,
You were just,
sometimes the extraction process of separating things into roles, I think especially with a new circle, can be really messy. And since we're not designing from mind, you really need to try something and get a feel for it. So there are some times where you can have very fuzzy. I, Content outreach was probably my best example of that, where as we were pulling out some of the functions, some of those functions still were just so embedded with other functions that we've had to extract them, but work still needs to get done while you're still figuring the boundaries out and how to get the
yeah,
circle organized. So, I mean, it would be almost a lot easier if you designed from mind, but I don't think that it would take, I think it would take more time, and then you'd spend a lot more time with the problem with the boundaries as opposed to the lack of clarity. So I don't know that it would really get you
yeah.
anywhere.
It's like a founder. I see Bernard Marie's comment in the chat. It's having been a founder for a couple of goes here. It is similar to being a founder of an organization, but now for a circle. You are
Mm-hmm.
kind of everything's fallen to you until you differentiate it out, and you're kind of holding the whole. So there's definitely an energy, and it's got to be practical, or you won't be a founder for long. So you've got to stay grounded in what is valuable for this circle to do, and not structure in a vacuum, but based on the real work needs. So all that is there.
Yeah,
Another,
I think it's just so important to remember that it is a role filler. So content and outreach, for example, now called outreach, is a role that I fill. So from the GCC, I fill that entire role. And if whether or not it's a circle or just a single role, I'm still filling all of it. So the difference is, in this case, now I've got other roles within outreach that have role fillers, and thank goodness they're role fillers. But in the end, it's just differentiation of a role.
yeah, yeah, and I think this speaks to one of the questions that came up in the chat here, and is also in my list of notes. Um, what's the difference between the lead link and the ref link? And is the lead link fundamentally more active than the ref link? And I think the answer to the first, they're not parallel. It's easy to think of the two as just two links in two different directions, and that's not accurate. And is the lead link more fundamentally active? I think the answer is generally yes. Well, I shouldn't say necessarily more active in terms of what they're doing, but has more to do. Which, there are times where ref link might be more active, but generally I think the answer is yes, because there's more function on the lead link than on the ref link. The lead link is acting as the role filler, the whole. The ref link does not have that same responsibility. And this is also why they're not parallel, right? The lead link, there is a parallel function. The lead link is a channel for tensions from the broader environment to get into the circle, and the ref link's a channel for tensions from within the circle to get out to the broader environment. That part is completely parallel. It's just two different directions. But that's not the only function, right? So then the lead link has another function. The lead link has a function of being the whole circle and holding the boundary of the whole circle, filling whatever falls in the cracks of the whole circle, bringing in resources into the circle and distributing them out around the different roles, right? So there's all these other functions that a lead link has to do that are simply not functions on the ref link. And maybe with more development and evolution of Holacracy, maybe we'll uncover more functions for the ref link than we have right now. But I'm fairly sure that evolution is unlikely to take it as duplicating the lead link. It will be something different. So the two roles are fundamentally different. There's definitely a relation or a connection, I think, available between the two. The lead link's a membrane, the ref link's a channel through the membrane. So there's definitely a connection there. And there's probably some other connections as well. But in general, I think that's one of the ways to kind of really understand the lead link is to realize it's not just a link, it's a role filler, right? What you were saying, Lex, really resonates. It's not just a link, it's a role filler. The ref link is more of a link role. It is not a role filler, it is a link. That's one of the harder things. I think when a company's new to Holacracy, one of the best things a former manager can do is actually almost just treat it just like a link, because they need to get out of the heroic leadership and get that away and differentiate from it, kind of reject that, push it out. Just be a link to channel tensions and do the minimal you need to make sure the organization doesn't get hurt beyond that. So You're still going to have to do some heroic leadership until it's really systemized. But then there's the reintegration of that. Then there's the, but as lead link, I'm role filler. I'm holder of boundaries. I'm filling this role, and anything that isn't clearly in a part of me is mine. If something leaks out of my other parts, I have to deal with it. So it's then kind of a reintegration of that into a very different thing, but one that blends in the best of what I think a good, healthy manager does in a conventional environment, and yet in a frame that is no longer done heroically and through unlimited autocratic power.
Yeah, I think of the Hreflang, I know that's not what this call is about, a little bit more like a special sensor. So as you're busy holding the membrane, you have sensing that's happening outside, which is the super circle role. Super circle lead link is going to sense. Other roles are going to sense. But within, you have a Hreflang that you can rely on to kind of sense things internally, because it is kind of difficult. That just puts you in charge of too much stuff, it feels like to me. So holding the membrane it doesn't necessarily take a lot of time, but there is an energy there, and you really have to have there's a certain energy of holding a membrane that is almost opposed, in my opinion, to being able to sense a lot of things internally. So I find it useful that I can just hold the membrane and let the internals kind of do the sensing that they need to do. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not as in tune with Hreflang. I don't have as much experience with the Hreflang, filling Hreflang.
Well, good thing that's not what this call's about. Then.
Yeah. So I know I do like that's there to kind of, that's something that I can rely on as lead link to kind of help ease any heroic tendencies, right? So you can really focus on what you're supposed to be doing.
It's a great leverage there. Knowing just as a lead link, knowing that there is a rep link is what frees me to say, you know what, it's not my job to channel things in that direction. It's not my job to process the tension sensed by everybody here that can't get processed within the circle. Let that go, let the rep link deal with it. So that said, let me look at some of my other questions here. One of the questions that came up, can a circle member who is not the lead link process certain kinds of tensions? So what about tensions, what about sensing that there's something kind of embedded in the existing governance that is limiting the overall circle? Where is it appropriate to process that? So, the way the existing roles are working together is not optimal. There's something in there that could be more effective. And I think that's a great example of one of the things that the lead link looks out for. Are there flows happening between roles? Is there something embedded in the existing governance that is just limiting somehow? Can another circle member process that? Well, technically, according to version 3.0 of the Constitution, yeah, there's no limit on what somebody can bring to try to process. And if somebody keeps doing that as lead link, I'm going to start feeling a tension unless it's grounded in, here's a role I fill, and here's the tension. Because I don't want somebody showing up personally, I want somebody showing up in role. So what I'm looking for, if somebody else is sensing that, are they not filling a role affected by it? Is one of their roles not at not limited? And are they just personally showing up as if an outsider in my circle? There's no rule against it in the Constitution, but it's a good way to get you thrown out of a circle. And that probably means maybe that ought to be a rule encoded in the Constitution so people don't have to worry about that. And in fact, that is one of the changes that will be coming in a future version of the Constitution. But until then, there's no rule against it. And yet what I'm looking for, which means it falls to me as lead link, is there something here violating a boundary for my circle? What I'm looking for is when somebody brings an issue that isn't just my role, but is about the whole way the governance of the circle works, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's grounded in, and here's how it's limiting my role, right? If it's not grounded in, here's how it's limiting my role, then there's a potential issue at play. Then the question is, well, why do you care? What role cares specifically? And that's what I mean by, I think that's a lead link function when it's outside of the concern of any given role. That's what the lead link's job is to work on all that. And open question for me, is that an appropriate job for the rep link too? Might be the answer is yes. Honestly, I don't know. But I do know that that's one of the things I do as lead link often, and it's a useful function as lead link. And if somebody else does it, it really needs to be grounded in what is my role.
Yeah,
So if you're going to stay with the design of the circle, make sure it's grounded in, here's a real tension I have felt in the way of one of my roles.
I think sometimes there's a bit of a challenge with that, is because sure, anybody can sense tension. There's nothing that says you can't do that. But the question is how to process it. So in some cases, I think the tricky part is that some cases it's not, you might bring something to governance and it's not within, it may be not within the membrane or not within the strategy, or the super circle just doesn't want that to happen. So sometimes there's other information that is not just about, or maybe it's an operational issue truly, it's maybe not enough resources or whatever. So that's where it gets to be a little bit tricky with sensing those things without actually feeling affecting a role you fill. So if none of the other role fillers are filling anything, sure, it might be a better way to do things. If the lead link isn't feeling it, then it could be something that's just not within the realm of the circle, or it may just be a different way of doing it, which isn't necessarily, sometimes that's better, sometimes it's just different. So yeah, it is a little bit tricky. I sort of feel like in any case, if you bring something in and no role really has any tension around it, not that they can't, if they can language it, that's great, but if they can't language it and there's a tension, that's great too. But if nobody cares, then you're really just changing things to change things. So sometimes it can be tricky to see what, if you're sensing it personally, and whether or not it will help the circle with its aim. And that is really kind of where it comes down to. Is it helping you, the circle, fulfill the purpose, or is it just something else?
Yeah, and it's not to say, I mean, there are plenty of issues. I could, if I wanted to, look at the governance of any of the circles in HolacracyOne, and I could pick out things that are fuzzy, or that are weird, or that seem conflicting or contradictory in some way. There's plenty of those. They exist. They exist all the time. That doesn't mean they're worth fixing, right? That you need that. Look in the human body. You'll see plenty of free radicals at any given point. That doesn't mean they need fixing. In fact, you'll see plenty of things that are off. Masses here and there. We're messy things. But you actually cause more harm than good when you go random. This is an issue that cancer screening has run into lately, of overdoing the reaction to that, of let's try to remove anything that looks even slightly off. And you actually cause more harm to the whole than good. You need to sense which ones are the ones we really need to fix, and same within a circle. So what you don't want is somebody seeing something off in the design and just going and fixing it because it's off in the design. It doesn't invalidate that it might be something off. Or another related question I see in Deborah's list for me is, what about a misalignment between purpose, strategy, and governance? Yeah, there could be those misalignments, but that doesn't mean they necessarily need fixing. The ones that need fixing are the ones that are getting in the way of expressing the work, and only just in time, once they're getting in the way of expressing the work. So what I'm doing as lead link, what I'm focused on is making sure there is clarity that everyone in this circle is acting on behalf of the roles of the circle, right? Because if they are, and something's getting in their way, then I can trust it. I know, okay, great, you're sensing something in the way, there's a process for you to get it out of the way. But what I don't want is somebody saying, oh, I sense something theoretically off. So there's that at play. And I think Bernard Marie's quote or comment here captures it really well. You are letting evolution do the job. And to do that, you need that boundary to be held. So to the questions I see in the list here about, what can other circle members process? Well, again, the Constitution says anything. As a circle member, you could say, you could process the tension that, you just want a nice, new, expensive car. You could try to process that in governance, but you can expect a lead link to say, why are you wasting the circle's time trying to process something that doesn't relate, isn't coming from one of the roles of the circle, right? So, and the same is true with issues of the organization structure, the roles within the circle. You want anything coming to that circle to be about the work of the circle, at least until we get the Constitution evolved to have a process to test that, just like we have a process to test objections to make sure they're coming from certain spaces. So until we get there, it's still the legal stuff.
Yeah, to me it's about workability, and again, it's still, if there's a proposal, for example, and everybody's just like looking at each other and shrugging, you know, then it's probably more designed for mine than lack of clarity. But sometimes as lead link, I find some of that stuff very helpful, especially if I've kind of been getting a sense of tension. But when I don't sense it and nobody else does, usually there's nothing really there, or it's not ready. It's just not ripe enough. So, because I think it could be very difficult to work with structure that's not right.
Yeah, and just a simple metaphor is, and I think that's an interesting point you make. When, as lead link, it can be really useful when somebody helps me with that. Really useful. When somebody sees something in the overall circle that doesn't relate to any of their roles, it's not in their way at all, it still might be something that maybe does need to get processed. We just need to make sure we get that tension and that awareness of that tension to the role that might be actually sensing the tension, whether that's a different role in the circle or the lead link. So, you know, when somebody comes to me and says, hey, look, this isn't affecting my roles at all. I did this with you just yesterday, Lex. I sent you an email. And I said, hey, look, there's something in the design at the GCC level that I think is off and is likely limiting other roles. I'm not sure, though. I think it is. But it doesn't affect my roles at all. I don't care. So what I didn't do was bring a proposal to governance. Instead, I sent you an email. And I said, hey, here's what I'd propose if I were lead link. And here's what I'm noticing, and is this useful? And it's yours to process or not. And I also send it to another role, not just lead link, but another role that might actually be feeling that tension. You happen to fill that other role as well, but the point is it didn't just go to lead link, it also went to another role that might be feeling that tension. But it didn't try to process it. And it's kind of like, you know, if I notice my neighbor has, you know, something going on with their car, you know, I might go and I might help them. Hey, I hear something weird in your engine. You know, you might want to take care of that, and here's what I think it is. But what I wouldn't do is go pop their hood, start pulling out my wrench, take apart their engine, and start trying to restructure it, right? It's just not appropriate. It's not my job. And they might have context I don't, right? They might say, hey, I'm planning to fix that on Thursday, or no, I'm letting it do that because I'm waiting to sense something else, or who knows, you know? So we're getting into I think just how to fill a role, even beyond lead link or otherwise, any role, is noticing what's the tensions you feel from your role versus what do you see as a human sensor that isn't on behalf of your role. For the latter category, route them. Don't try to restructure the organization around them would be my general best practice, I guess. And so, okay, let's shift. Another question that comes up here is what about some of the human stuff? So when you sense different values or mental models operating among the members of your circle, and you know, things like that, or different talents and you know, role assignments that are maybe off with somebody's talents and stuff like that. What do you do as lead link? And let's hold off on the role assignment thing. What about when you sense differing mental models or values at play? And my answer is I do absolutely nothing with that and don't feel like it's part of my job as lead link.
Yeah,
what about you, Lex?
I'm not sure I understand the context of what would be a problem with differing values. Sometimes what I do is let that inform me for a role fit, because sometimes somebody that's got a certain mental model about something means that they'll do better filling that role. But for the most part, I don't really care if there's clashes. I'm more looking for how can the circle use that different talent set. So, but yeah, so for example, clashing values or mental models don't matter because each role has authority. So as long as it's within your role, then there's not really a clash there. Any clashes has to either be lack of clarity, which I would have to worry about. Could be a symptom of lack of clarity. If you're allowed to clash from holacracy, if two roles have so much authority that overlaps that actually becomes an issue, then that's something that I will look for. There's some smells that you can get of lack of clarity that just can tune you into that. But for the most part, two people not getting along or just having value clashes shouldn't really be an issue because they're filling different roles with ultimate authority. Now maybe if they're, well, multi-filled, it's just usually a lack of clarity issue as far as I can tell. So the only thing that I would look for is lack of clarity, or if there's something that makes them a better role fit.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. That resonates with me too. It's as long as when you have clear authority, whoever has the authority, they use their mental model. And to the extent that somebody else doesn't hold that mental model and cares, they can try to get aligned with it or not. But
yeah,
really
it
not
really
my
depends
job
on
as
if there's. It could be a role fit issue because some roles actually rely on a specific value set. Maybe I fill a role Agile Process Coach, which tries to hold an Agile software development value set and principles and things like that. So it's not my personal value set that I'm trying to enforce, it's more of a role need, or the role is holding a specific mental model in order to do its job, and other roles need to comply with that through governance. If it's not in governance, then it's not an issue, but then that might be indicative of role fit if somebody's not complying with another role's specifics. But as far as interpersonal value on value, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And the role fit issue is the one. So I'm not actually, as lead link, I'm less concerned about whether somebody feels like their talents and passions and interests are aligned with the role. I'm more concerned with good fit for the sake of the organization. And those are important data points for that, but just that. So it's not my job to help people find roles that they love. It's their job to find roles that they love. It's my job to figure out, of my available options, what's the right fit for this role, and does somebody have enough passion, talent, interest, whatever, to do this role justice,
or
to
well
fill
enough.
it well. And if
I'm looking for best fit, and sometimes that's all you don't have. I've filled plenty of roles where I was not a good fit, but I was the best fit we had. Maybe I was what was available. But if that's workable for people, then it can be painful, but it's workable. So I think that sometimes too people will have think that there's a performance issue or something with somebody who's just filling it because they're the best fit available, as opposed to the perfect fit of the most wonderful, whatever, which you're never going to find. So
yeah. I look for the intersection of, all right, what is the energy and talent and skill and wisdom the person's going to bring to the role, and passion is part of that. If somebody's really passionate, they'll bring more. Within the caveat best fit, if nobody's passionate, all right, is anybody interested? If nobody's interested, all right, it would be a huge energy drain. Right? But I take all of those positives, what skill, talent, passion, interest, and then I also look at, all right, how much am I going to have to do lead link if they're in the role? How much are they going to get in the way of other stuff functioning effectively in the circle, right? And I do this mental math of A minus B. That's my net value, right? So and I've had people long ago who worked in the organization I ran, and you can see different. You see some people that are they're not bringing a massive wealth of passion or whatever, but they don't get in anybody's way. And then you see other people that bring a massive depth of skill, intellect, passion, whatever it is, and then they are so excited they cause turbulence in everybody else, and that gets subtracted some. But it's different for different roles what you're looking for. The more that I can, basically as lead link, it sounds horrible to say, but a great role fit is somebody that is going to bring lots of energy for that role, sit down, shut up, and do the work. And it's everything we're taught not to want as a manager. We don't want to do that in the conventional sense. No, they have a way to process the tensions that are getting in the way of their work, and they're not bound just to that role. They can go pitch themselves for any role in the organization that they want to fill. Given all of that, as lead link, when I'm looking at just one role, what I want is somebody that can bring a lot of intellect, passion, skill, wisdom, whatever the role needs, focus it in the role, and then sit down, shut up, and get that role's work done.
There's a lot of authority in that too, which is interesting. It's almost the shut up and do your work, and oh, by the way, there's distributed authority, so you're a leader in your role. So it almost sounds, it's almost weird to say it like that, because it's really there's so much authority and so much responsibility and so much leadership in any role that like, sit down, shut up, and run your company basically is the equivalent in a modern conventional business, you know. So
yes, yeah, it's like I want somebody that can come in and be a hero for that role and absolutely not beyond that role, right? And that's an interesting thing, and of course you can never quite, that takes a lot of seasoning to get to. Usually somebody's too much of a hero outside their role or not enough hero in their role, right? Rarely do people actually have the ability to manage that boundary. But that's ideally what I'm looking for. Somebody that can be a hero in their role and just a friendly neighbor outside their role. You know, that's what I want. And who has all the skills and all that needed. So that's a good role fit. And then beyond that, I'm trusting the people to find their own roles. I'm not trying to help people find roles. I've got the roles, and I'm looking for who can fill them. And I'm trusting that people are going to go find the roles and pitch the lead links and get the roles that make the most sense for the organization, for everyone to hold, and get their own needs met in the process, or realize they can't and go somewhere else that they can fill better roles that resonate with them.
It's sort of just, I think role fit is really contextual based on the needs of the role, the needs of the circle. There are some times where I have done role filling, fill a role with somebody that isn't actually the best fit, but maybe the best fit was already filling a very highly related role, and it's the best way to help the roles differentiate from each other or whatever. So I think clarity on that really helps a lot. I've filled roles where I'm just basically holding the line. I'm just holding the role until somebody else can come in and take it, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's all in service of the purpose.
Absolutely. Well, we're at the end of our time, so on that note, Lex, anything final you want to say in conclusion as we end our session today? Yeah, that was great. I do feel like we could probably say more, and there's a lot more to dig into there, but I hope that gives at least an overview of how at least two of us here, filling a lot of lead link roles and sensing into what's needed in them, have figured it out. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for your questions and comments.